The floor is open, yeah.
Someone sent the question. When people say just be yourself, how are you not being yourself at all times?
When people say just be yourself, how are you not being yourself at all times? It's a bit of a joke, but there's something a little bit deeper there. There is a quote from Shakespeare, which people, to thine own self be true. Now, if you don't look up the context, you think, well, that's Shakespeare, and he was very smart and very deep and very good observer and so forth and so on, and he was. But those words sound, I think, pretty distressing. Let's see. To thine own self be true. Would that leave room for self-improvement? I really am greedy. I work hard not to take things from other people, so forth and so on. No! To thine own self be true. You're greedy, so be greedy. Take from other people. Be aggressive and so forth. Don't hide it. Don't lie about yourself. Oh, excuse me, I do want to hide it. I think I should hide it. And maybe if I hide it long enough, maybe I'm going to be able to change it. To my own self be true. Why is myself something that's automatically so precious and so perfect that I want to just be true to it? Now, of course, the deeper problem here is that the self divides up. It is an accident that many theories of psychology treat the self as a committee, because there are certain features of life which can't be, or we don't know how to describe them without using a committee picture. Self-deception. If deception means causing someone to believe something false when I know that I'm doing that, then I know what the truth is. So strictly speaking, you can't deceive yourself. But then there's one part of you deceiving another part of you. So in that way, you have the ability to describe it, or overcoming your own impulses. Well, who's the overcoming and who's the one that's getting overcome? If there's only one there, A can't overcome itself, so then there's the impulses, and then there's the will, and the will overcomes the impulses, so you already have a committee. So, the idea of treating the human being, and we have Yetzer Tov, Yetzer Hara, and there's more than just that, because the neshama has different levels to it, and the different levels have different functions. So we too have a picture of a committee. It's not a joke. So in being yourself, well, which part of yourself are you manifesting, and which part of yourself are you hiding? Which part of yourself are you in process of changing? If put all of that into be yourself, then it isn't what was meant when the person said it. That's not what he meant. He didn't mean just, as normally evaluate and classify and set priorities and then change this and change that. If that's all it meant, just to have the whole package of full psychological functioning, then yeah, it would be true. But that would be a self in process, and a self part of which is condemned, and a self part of which is idealized, and a self part of which is changing, and then it wouldn't be static; it would be dynamic, and would be. I think then it would be trivial, and you would say you're always being yourself the whole time. But the self you were last year won't be the self you are this year. So you have to build that in. Yeah.
So with Hanukkah coming up, would you say that mathematically speaking that Dreidel is a good game?
The whole point of the game is just to have fun wasting time. So think about the probabilities and how much the payoff should be and so on. That's not getting it. That's not the point of it. So that's the kind of remark that I, in a previous carnation, could have made. Okay, what are the probabilities? How much should you bet? Study the random walk. And see where the extremes would be, and then take how long was the average time till you get to beyond the extremes, and some of the sort of go bankrupt. That's how the games work. Why does the casino make money? Because if they're not cheating, and some of them do cheat, if they're not cheating, so then the outcomes are random, and you have what's called a random walk, which has minus variations. Then from time to time, a large variation, and an individual player has a limit to how much money he can put in. So when his random luck puts him down below that limit, he quits and loses. But the casino has a bank with $150 million in it. So you don't get to the bottom of their random walk. That's how he can outlast the other guys and pull them off when they lose. That's the reason why it works that way. So I don't think that, that's the kind of question that one should spend time on. Yeah, was noch? Hmm?
So there's a question that Moshe asks, and I know that it's brought up a few other places about why the good deserve bad treatment, and or why the good sometimes suffer and why the bad do well. My question is, why is it for some people that are on such a high level, why is that so much of a question? Why wouldn't they just say, it's Hashem, he runs the world,
Okay, there are two things to say here. First of all, the question is misunderstood. The Ramchal talks about this. There are two entirely different questions. One question is, if God is all-powerful and all-knowing, and he's good, how come bad things happen? This question is raising what could be a contradiction to our basic beliefs. Taking his goodness, his knowledge, and his power together, the thought is that nothing bad should happen. And bad things do happen. So then the thought is, since bad things happen, there must be something wrong with our beliefs. That's a challenge to the Jewish belief system. Okay? And not everybody has to do philosophy, but if you are a thinker and you want to be straight with your ideas, that's a very fundamental question that needs to be addressed. And our literature has addresses that question from the beginning to the end. The book of Job was written by Moses. The book of Job is essentially about that question. So, and then down to the Achronim, if Esther writes about it, everybody writes about it. So it's not as if we ignore that question. To that question, we have plenty of answers, plenty of well-known answers, cataloged answers, which answer that question beyond any shade of a doubt. That is to say, there are reasons why bad things happen, even to people who are good people, and we know many of them. There are probably more that we don't know, but we know many of them. And you take any particular person who's suffering, and if you have a realistic picture of his record, how good or bad he is, right? There's always one or more of the reasons which you can apply to explain it. Now, you have to be very careful what's going on here. I can use the principles to explain it. That doesn't mean the explanation is true. Doesn't mean the explanation is true. It's just that there is a principle which could explain it. And then it's not a mystery how it happened. Right? So having the principles that could explain, that's pablum. We have that. We know that we have that. If you want to see it in the Ramchal, in part 2 of the Way of God, chapters 2 and 3, he has like 8 different principles of why people suffer. Here's one, which from a Kabbalistic point of view is a grand principle. And with this one principle, you could knock out all the questions. And that is, people are put into the world to develop and demonstrate ideal spiritual behavior under particular conditions. And each person's job is to develop it under different spiritual conditions. And one spiritual condition is illness. That's a condition which challenges a person to respond in a spiritual way. And he'll be ill his whole life. He didn't do anything wrong. He's a perfect tzaddik. He's absolutely wonderful in terms of his Torah and mitzvahs and learning and everything else, because his purpose in the world is to perfect living with illness. And another person's perfect in the world is to perfect living with poverty. So there's no question there. Why is he saying? Not because he's being punished. Not being punished. That's his contribution to the perfection of the world. With that one principle, I could say, no matter what the person is suffering, you can't say that that's not part of a good God's conduct of the world, because he's not punishing him unjustly. He set that as part of his tikkun for the world. And there are many other principles like that. So that wasn't Moses' question. Moses' question wasn't, I don't see how God could be all-knowing, all-powerful, and all good, because bad things happen. That wasn't his question. His question was, given the list of principles that explain this in general, When I see Ruvain suffering, how could I know which principles really explain why he's suffering in his particular case? And that, Hashem said to him, you can't know that. You can't know that. It's something that requires a grasp of the infinity of creation and all the principles to the top, and a human being can't know that. Now, listen, I want to make the logical point clear here because it applies in many, many different cases. Why did he kill him? Why did he kill him? Well, you know something? He's an inheritor of his estate, and he needs money. Okay, he needs money. He's inherited the estate, right? So, now listen carefully. That could be why he killed him. He has a motive. But I don't know that that is why he killed him. We don't know that. All we know is he had that motive, so we could explain it if it were true. It's not a mystery why it happened, but we might not have the right motive. Maybe he insulted him in public and got angry with him, and that's why he shot him. I mean, he didn't care about the inheritance. Maybe it had nothing to do with it. So, evolutionary biology is full of this kind of mistake. Why did this survive and that not? This had sharper claws. Okay, had sharper claws. Do you know that that's what enabled it to survive? No, all you know is you think the sharper claws are very helpful, so that could do it. It's enough to explain it. It's not a mystery how it happened, but that might not be how it happened. These are what are called just so stories. There's a big difference between saying, I have a way to explain it so it's not a mystery, versus I know what happened. Don't confuse the two of them. It doesn't support your position when you say, I have a way to explain it, except that the case you're dealing with doesn't show you're wrong, because you have some way to explain it. That doesn't mean you're right either. To be right, you got to know the actual evidence, to know the actual sequence, the actual scenario, and be able to pin down that this is really why it happened. You know, in court, you would never convict a person on the grounds that he had a motive to do it. That wouldn't be enough. You'd have to show that it was that motive that led him to do it, and that you may not know. You may not have evidence for that. Yeah, right in the back.
If you read, let's say there are reason you just gave us, which is that some people need to achieve different things in different places, how do you get around the problem of, if I get a choice of either achieving my life as I am, and I have a certain distance to go, or having a certain distance to go and not being able to walk, I would very gladly choose to live my life rather than that life. So even if that's his purpose, it's theoretically possible to have a purpose, but that's without the problem. How's that?
I'm not sure that I'm understanding you, but what I hear you saying, if this isn't what you mean, then you have to say it over again. And that is that even though that's his purpose that God assigns to him, he might not agree.
No, why is it that is the only way for him to fulfill his purpose? If I could fulfill my purpose without being sick, why is it that he has to be sick to fulfill his purpose?
Because there are lots of different purposes. Well, the question is very, very strange. That your question needs as a premise, everybody has the same purpose, and that's certainly not true. Why would it be that if he has to be sick, that you don't have to be sick? Why would that be? Because there are different purposes. You could only assume that since you can get away, you can fulfill your purpose without. Why is he sick? As if only everybody has all the same purpose. And if I'm fulfilling the purpose, the one purpose without being sick, why would he need to be sick to fulfill the one purpose that we're both fulfilling? But it's not true that there's only one purpose. There are many, many different purposes.
There's one purpose. There's many purposes. Why is it that he got one purpose that requires him to be sick? It was impossible for his being to have a different purpose without sickness.
Right. Well, because souls aren't identical. Souls are not put into places at random. They're crafted to be able to make this particular tikkun, make this particular success. Given the soul that he had, this is where his success comes. And given the soul that you have, it's a different type of success. And our view of this, to say Chazal, based on a pasuk, that the test of being wealthy is a much more difficult test than being poor. So if you're thinking about how many ice cream cones you get, that's one thing. But if you're thinking about having a successful life, if the dial spins to $250,000 a year, that should shake you, because it's very, very likely that my life will be unsuccessful in many ways if I have to face that test. Yeah.
A question related to an idea that Rav presents in his sefer. So one of the ideas that Rav talks about is that if a certain assertion or proposition has no positive evidence in his favor, then we can ignore it because we have no reason and therefore no responsibility to believe in it. And then he goes to the different religions, shows that there are all the other religions in the world basically, or many other religions that will lack the positive evidence. Some lack more than that, but at the very least many of them lack this positive evidence in their favor. So I guess using this idea, I have a question related to the Sinai revelation itself. Because at the Sinai revelation, because we can use the Kuzari principle basically to say that the Sinai revelation, to prove that the Sinai revelation actually took place. Now, what is this story about the Sinai revelation? The story is that the Jewish people heard a heavenly voice speak to them, and this heavenly voice told them, I am the creator of the universe, and I would like to now share with you the reason why I created the world. So the Kuzari principle tells us that this experience was a real historical event in our world.
That's right.
So fine, that we can understand. My question though is, what evidence do we have that the assertion that this heavenly voice was making at Har Sinai was a true assertion? Meaning, wouldn't that also need evidence? Just because this heavenly voice claimed to be the creator of the universe, who's to say that he was really telling the truth? Maybe he was lying, or maybe he got confused when he told us that.
Okay, now,
which
hold on a second. The way you're putting it now is a confusion which I worked very hard to take care of in the book.
Okay, so maybe I missed something.
The statement that there's evidence in favor of A, the statement that there is evidence in favor of A, isn't defeated by maybe it's something else. That doesn't defeat the statement that there is evidence. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's something else defeats the claim that it's certain that A happened, that it's necessary that A happened, that we have 100% certain knowledge of it's happening. Maybe can defeat that. But when you present evidence for something, maybe it was different, doesn't defeat the proposition that there is evidence for it. When you say that there's evidence for something, you are leaving open the possibility that it's not true. All maybe does is cite an alternative possibility. That's not a critique of the claim that there is positive evidence. The evidence is not designed to produce certainty. It's designed to produce credibility, and that's the way we deal with all of life.
No, but I'm focusing on a different point. I'm saying I understand there's positive evidence in favor of this experience.
Right.
We have reason to believe that this experience took place, meaning that the Jews stood at Har Sinai and there was a heavenly voice that spoke to them and told them, I am the creator of the universe and here's why I created the world. We have reason to believe this experience took place.
Right.
Fine. Now I have a new question. Don't I also need positive evidence in favor of the assertion that that heavenly voice was making?
So stop there. Yes, you do. But you don't convince us of that. You don't enforce that by saying maybe it was something else. Maybe something else doesn't do the job. Because even after you have the evidence, you'll be able to say maybe it was something else. Right, so then it's not justifying the requirement that there be evidence to say maybe it was something else. That's not what's going to justify it. Mm-hmm. Now, let's put yourself in the position where they were, right? They went through the plagues. They went through the splitting of the sea. They went through being provided in the wilderness. Already before Sinai, they had the pillar of fire and the pillar of cloud. This isn't just someone with a bullhorn standing behind the mountain talking to them. This is something absolutely unheard of and they saw it visibly day after day after day. So the one that's speaking to them is one that has enormous power and enormous control over nature, and obviously is concerned about them, right? Is it still possible he's not the creator? Yeah, maybe it could be, but that doesn't mean I don't have the evidence. What I'm dealing with here is absolutely unique in the history of the world, and it's something which millions of people verified immediately. If you think yourself back to the medievals, Rambam, the Ramban, and others. And I think this goes all the way back, in fact, to Aristotle. There are only two, Rambam says this in the Nevuchim, there are only two overall pictures of the universe, of the existence. Either it's natural or it's created. Those are the only two positions that could explain overall what the world that we live in. And nature has certain rules. Nature has things happen repetitively, and under certain circumstances, the very same thing happens over and over again, or almost every time, and things have an order to them. If something happens that violates that order, then you go to creation right away. There isn't a third option available to you. If you think there's a third option, then you have a different philosophy of how to globally describe the world, and it would be nice to hear it in detail and see whether it works or it doesn't work and so forth and so on. But that's definitely where the Rambam and the Rambam are coming from.
Why is that? Why do you have to automatically jump to that?
You only ask that question if there's an alternative competing with it. If it's something's a natural, why do you jump to 2 + 2 is 4? Why do you jump to that? Why not to 2 + 2 is 5? Because it's not an alternative. So here, the way that they understood nature was something that was organized and regular and structured. The Rambam brings a proof of creation from disorder. From disorder. Not what you call intelligent design, where everything's ordered, you're amazed by the order. He says, you look at the heavens, and Aristotle's explanation of how the heavenly bodies move, even Aristotle knew it wasn't good, because it's not ordered. You have some spheres going this way and some spheres going that way. They're going at different speeds. There's no order that the closer ones in are going faster, the ones that are going outer. No, some is slower and faster and slower. The whole thing is totally disordered. You said, well, that's not nature. Nature isn't disordered like that. Nature is orderly, and therefore it's not nature. If it's not nature, then it's creation. What else is there besides the world by itself is carrying itself, or something outside of it is carrying it? That's roughly the thought process. So I'm not placing this in the modern world. You have to do some more work to place it in the modern world. But the idea that we have evidence, yeah, there's definitely evidence there. And then could it be otherwise? Yeah, it can always be otherwise. I don't believe we achieve certainty in anything, not even in mathematics.
They had a supernatural existence for a long time, the Jewish people, leading up to the Sinai revelation.
Yeah, a long time. It was several months, almost a year with the plagues in Egypt taken into account. And it was predicted, after all. The one who's speaking in the name of that power said, in 3 days there's going to be a revelation. It's going to be like this and this and this, and it happens exactly the way he says. So
This heavenly voice spoke to the Jewish.
No, Moses. Moses told them, prepare yourselves for 3 days, and after 3 days, this and this is going to happen. You can go up to the mountain, and you can go behind the mountain to a borders around the mountain, and it happened exactly the way he predicted that it was going to happen. Same thing with the crossing of the sea. The Egyptians are bearing down on them, and they're all in despair, and Moses says, don't worry. And they say, go back to Brooklyn. What do you mean, don't worry? We're going to be dead. And he says, no, you won't. Watch. You're not going to be dead. And then the sea splits. I mean, he has a lot of credibility, Moses. Look at the things that happened when he said they would happen. So this is not... This is definitely evidence, yeah.
I have another probability question. So if, given that whatever outcome we see in the universe is consistent with Hashem's desire, if you were to say, for example, say a prayer, like if you're conflicted about something and you say a prayer and say like let this coin, the result of this coin flip be the answer that I'm supposed to do. On one hand, it seems like it would be probability, but would that actually work as trying to channel what Hashem wants for you to try to communicate with that?
Yeah, I think that's right. I'm not sure that under those circumstances it's permissible to do it exactly that way. But for example, take the sacrifice on Yom Kippur, where you have the 2 goats, and the mitzvah is to have 2 goats that are as identical as possible. And then you take lots, right? Now, what's the message? So superficially, without understanding Jewish ideas, the message is, doesn't matter. You made them as identical as possible, and it's just a random choice, because it doesn't matter. Yeah, but there's 2 lots, and the one is Lashem Chatas, and he announces it and shows it up, that this one is the one for Hashem, and this one is going to Azazel, right? The real message is, there are differences you can't see. And God runs the world on differences you can't see. And this is precisely why Megillas Esther, because Esther is written in Hebrew, right? But then there's the Pur of Purim, and Pur is the Persian word. And in Megillas Esther it says, Pur, I'm sorry to the reader, That's Persian. I'll tell you, it's the Goral. He has to translate it into Hebrew for the reader who doesn't have it. So don't write it. Don't put the word in pur. Put in the word Goral. No. Haman was using a pur, which is a concept in Persian fantasy, and he's saying, yeah, that's what he's doing. That's what he has in mind, but he doesn't know that his pur really is a Goral. It's really choosing something that does have significance. It's not something which isn't random or whatever else they said about it. So I think the idea here is that when you flip a coin, it's not an accident that it comes down heads or tails. If you make something depend upon it, it might be a crime to do that. It might mean that you're making it happen in a way that, but it wouldn't be an accident. In other words, if you said, I'll decide this way or that way, then of course Baruch Hu will take into account the fact that you said it in determining which way it should come down. Again, it might not be to your benefit because you might be making a mistake in doing that, but definitely related. And the bottom line is, what looks random is only a matter of our ignorance as to what the difference really are. Yeah, in the back.
To what extent can we use like things that we see in nature that like are crazy to do like to affect our judgment what to do? Like if you see clouds that say like go right, and then maybe like God's testing you, don't go right just because you saw that cloud. So, like,
Okay, so that first of all, your thought is a very good thought, because when you think of an interpretation for something, the first thing you should ask is, what other interpretations could there be? And then you'll have to have a principled way to decide which interpretation is correct. Now, there are cases in the Gemara where they did use certain types of signs to decide what to do. I haven't gone through the sugya carefully, and I don't know exactly what you can and what you can't do. Even Eliezer, who comes to the well, and essentially what he says to Kadosh Baruch Hu is, I'm in an impossible position. I'm going to choose the wife of the second patriarch. This is totally beyond me. I haven't got the tools to make a decision like this. Yet, please present a girl who will do these things, and then I'll use her as my choice, right? And the Gemara is split as to whether what he did was right or wrong. On the one hand, it's like divination. It's like, if she's a brunette, yes, and she's a blonde, no. But on the other hand, he used chesed, and chesed is certainly a relevant characteristic, and the Gemara is split whether what he did was right or wrong. So that's why I'm hesitating to answer you, so whether it's a right thing to do or wrong. And there are such things as simanim, which sometimes Chazal used. So I don't know the exact limits to it. But your point is I think much more general. I write about this in my new book, Hashem. It's coming out. Things happen, and you want to know why they happen and what the message is. What's the message? So the tricky reality is, it didn't happen by accident. It was chosen for you. But like when you go down to the newsstand and you get the international newsstand, and you see some pieces of paper there that are printed with chicken tracks, just splotches, that's from China. Okay, to us they just look like decoration. To them, they're words. Is there a message there? Yeah, there's a message there, just that I can't read it. Right? And it's not a message that's meant for me. So the things that happen to me have a meaning. They're chosen. They play a role. It's just that very often that meaning is not accessible to me. So I have to take them with what HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives me and say, if there's an explicit mitzvah that applies, when this happens, say the Tzilas Haderech, for example. Okay, so that I know what to do. And if not, I should have to confess my ignorance. It didn't used to be that way. When we had prophets, from the time of the Exodus until the beginning of the Second Temple, it was about 1,000 years, there were 1,200,000 prophets, 600,000 men and 600,000 women. It says that explicitly in the Medrash. So everybody lived with Nevi'im, everybody lived with prophets. And says the Rambam, during that period of time, no one went to a doctor. Why would you go to a doctor? You have a physical symptom, your whole physical condition is a symptom. Not that part of it is symptoms and part of the disease. The whole thing is a symptom of your spiritual condition. Because Baruch Hu gives you this symptom in order to wake you up and to get you to correct something. You go to the Navi, to the prophet, and say, what does he want me to correct? And the Navi explains it to you, and then you correct it, and it goes away. What's the doctor doing in the house of the servants of Hashem is said about that period. We don't have that. So Kadosh Baruch Hu wants us to live with the ignorance and get what information we can from time to time, but to know that Kadosh Baruch Hu took away that resource because he wants us to live under different conditions. That's roughly what's going on. Yeah.
So I just want clarification on the last question I asked. So Hashem was telling Moshe that I can't tell you the reason I put people in, like people with a disease in this position, in that position. Is that what he was saying? Like you can't.
Well, it's a little
you can't
tricky.
explain to him.
It's a little tricky. There are places where the message is there is a reality, but you won't be able to get it. Rambam talks about this when he talks about going beyond the thing Mishura Sadid. Rambam says twice in his commentary on the Chumash that the rules of interpersonal conduct and the rules of personal, individual conduct can't be written down. Now, this is in his commentary on the Torah, who it's written by who? By the Creator. And he says it can't be written down. So I guess it means that the Creator can't write them down? Isn't that a kind of questionable statement? What do you mean he can't do it? And the answer, the simple answer is, well, they could be written down, but there would be 3 trillion rules, and we wouldn't be able to learn them. So he couldn't communicate them to us by writing them down for us. And therefore, the Ramban says, your service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu has 2 levels. The rules that he did give us, which are precise and rigorous and binding, and then an open-ended challenge to extend yourself beyond the rules in certain directions, and there you have to make your own decisions as to how to extend yourself, because he can't write them down for us. So now, the sentence is going to be true in general about how he communicates to us. So what he says to Moses is one of 2 things. Either the circumstances are so broad and varied, and so much of it has to be counted, that your mind can't hold it. And I created your mind, so therefore I put you in a position where you can't know this. Or there could be a temporary block. When Moses asks to be shown God's essence, according to the Rambam, Harini knows Kvodecha, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to him, Lo yirani ha'adam v'chai. A man cannot know me and live, cannot see me and live. Now, if you're not totally asleep, you think, so it's because he's alive that he can't do that. What about after death? And Rambam says explicitly in Hilchos Tshuva, if I remember correctly, it's chapter 8, he says, after death, you can know HaKadosh Baruch Hu's essence. You can. And he says, that's what Nehenim Ziv Shechina means. They have pleasure in knowing HaKadosh Baruch Hu's essence, Amitatso, his essential nature. So then it's a temporary thing. In this world, with the body inhibits the soul and inhibits the intellect. The intellect is downgraded in order to fit into this reality. But when the body is no longer inhibiting the soul, then it can be known. So maybe it's not something that can't be known, but there are local circumstances which make it impossible for us to know temporarily. And that, for the Rambam, would be since we know that he feels this way about the essence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it would be very natural to say that you could understand that later. But now, it can't be known by us. Who else? Yeah.
Is Judaism racist? Do a quick one. Like from
Yeah.
you're saying that there's a different connection that a Jew could get than a non-Jew.
Well, that's okay. Nice of you to pick a word that has at least 16 different usages, and all of them are politically charged. It's over the sun. Yeah, I mean, after all, does racist have anything to do with races? You shifted it where it doesn't. Because after all, there are Jews of all races, right? There are black Jews, there are Oriental Jews, there are Hispanic Jews, right? So if racist meant something about races, gosh, racist, should there be an association there, do you think? Is there any relevance of racist to racist? God, I don't know. You know, it depends who you want to slap with your words. That's nothing to do with the reality. So if racist has to do with racist, then of course it's not racist, because there are Jews of all different races. End of story. Does it think that Jews are different from non-Jews? That's not racism. That's particularism or chauvinism or something else, right? Yes, of course, Jews and non-Jews are not the same. They're definitely not equal. They're definitely not equal in God's eyes, and even though they're standing in the world, they're definitely not equal. But having said that, let me give you just a little bit of background. This is based on part 1 of the Way of God by Lutzato. It's scattered throughout that whole part. what's the status of there being a two-tiered humanity? Upper tier and lower tier. Those are closer. Those are further away. Those have certain superiority. Those have certain inferiority. Is that God's plan? Is that God's will that the world should be that way? There should be two different sections of humanity, one upper and one lower. Not only isn't it his will, he tried 4.5 times to overcome it. So let's take a look. Garden of Eden. If Adam and Chava had succeeded in the challenge of not eating from the tree of knowledge and the other challenges that they had, and they would never have been chased out of the Garden of Eden, never have been cursed, would there have been an upper group and a lower group? Absolutely not. According to Ramchal, they would have had children, lots and lots of children, and they would have formed groups, and then the future would have gone on from there, but there wouldn't have been an upper group and a lower group. Okay, that was a failure. After that, they're kicked out of the Garden of Eden, they multiply, and it has a period of roots, Ramchal said, where the challenge was to become the kind of person who represents, these are my words, who represents the Garden of Eden reality in this new reality. And he says, anyone and everyone could have done it. Everyone could have done what Abraham did, and the challenge was there, and the possibility there was for everybody. And the ideal outcome would have been for everyone to have done what Abraham did, and be one people of all humanity, which becomes now the bearers of the spirituality in the world. But they didn't. That was tried too. After that, you had the 70 nations. Any nation or any part of a nation could detach itself and become part of the Jewish people. The door was open. And the ideal would have been for everybody to become part of the Jewish people. That didn't happen. When it came to Sinai, the Midrash says, and as I have mentioned to some of you, the default position in Midrash is they're not literally true. That's the default position. Sometimes they are. When the commentators said that they are, then you take them literally that way. But the default, the Maharal says this over and over and over again. Chazal were interested in the spiritual roots of things, and they were not addressing the physical world. But this one, the one that Kodesh Baruch Hu offered the Torah to all the peoples of the world, that one, the Ramchal says, is literally true, which means, just like 2 days before Sinai, on 4th of Sivan, Moshe Rabbeinu said to Klal Yisrael, Kodesh Baruch Hu is going to give you a Torah, and the Torah is going to be available to you. On the 4th of Sivan, there was nothing on the no fire on the mountain and no sound of the shofar. Everything was peaceful and calm and natural. So do you want it or don't you want it? Every other nation had some leader, whether it was the king or the high priest, someone with credibility, to make the same offer to every other nation. The ideal outcome would have been for every nation to say yes. And then the whole world would have accepted the Torah together. That was the 4th time HaKadosh Baruch Hu tried to reach everybody equally. Doesn't look like it's built into God's plan that there should be two groups, the upper group and the lower group. He was rebuffed 4 times by humanity in 4 efforts. I say 4.5 because after Sinai, the door is open for conversion, and the ideal achievement of mankind would have been for everyone to convert and become Jewish. That's piecemeal only. So it's a relative failure in the development of human history that there are two levels, an upper, lower, and a lower level. It's not something that HaKadosh Baruch Hu put into the world and desired to be in the world and wanted to be in the world. No, it's a lower reality. But of course, there is a difference between Jews and non-Jews, fundamental. Yeah.
I'm so sorry to go back to the question, Eli, but I'm trying to clarify the rough answer. So the Rabbi is saying that the Jews had a supernatural existence for months leading up to Har Sinai. So they saw that there was some sort of divine being that's in control of nature and can change nature. So they had this experience for months leading up to it. And the Rabbi is saying that is evidence that the voice that spoke to them in Har Sinai is that same divine being that has been manipulating nature for all those months leading up to this experience in Har Sinai.
I mean, I didn't say it. You didn't ask that question. You asked whether I have evidence that what the voice says is true. Now you're asking a different question: whether that voice is the same being that split the sea. That's a different question, which you didn't even hint at before.
Well, so maybe I should clarify my question. The question I'm trying to ask is: the divine voice at Har Sinai told them, "I am the creator of the world," and I'm saying in order to
Actually, why do you say that? It didn't say that. He said, "I took you out of Egypt." He didn't say, I'm the creator of the world. The Kuzari asked that question, why he didn't say that. He didn't say that. He said, I took you out of Egypt, that's all.
Okay, but the Jewish tradition says that this was the creator of the world that spoke to them.
Right, but
So
you-
where is
but
it
he-
coming from?
We're talking about Sinai. He said the voice said, and how do I have evidence that what the voice said is true? And then you said the voice said that I'm the creator of the world, and it's not true. He didn't say that.
Okay.
He specifically didn't say that.
Okay, fine. So he didn't say that, but it seems like the Jewish tradition is such that the nation that stood at Har Sinai understood that the voice that was speaking to them was the creator of the world.
So again, because that voice is the voice that's behind all of the miracles that took place. Right? They were witnessing miracles at Sinai itself, right? The ground was on fire. There was smoke and cloud in the fire. The ground was bouncing underneath them. There was a sound of a shofar. All of that is supernatural.
Sure, but how do they know that the voice that was speaking to them is the same the power, is the same divine being that's manipulating nature?
Because he's manipulating nature now. You mean to say manipulation comes from one thing and something else, you know?
He's
So
speaking, and maybe there's
how do
another
I know that
divine
you're talking to me now? Maybe there's a hidden microphone and it's coming from somebody else and you're just waving your hands. Maybe you're not really talking. I mean, these are only possibilities. You take the world in the simplest way, in the most direct way, in terms of the evidence that you have from the way the world runs, and you apply that to circumstances unless you have evidence against it. Here, each one was predicted. Maybe there are 10 gods, and one did this Makkah, and one did that Makkah, and one did that Makkah. Maybe, but when you have the same representative, and he's saying it in the name of the same one, and it happens exactly as it's predicted, surely the simplest, the most natural explanation is that it's one being, not many beings.
When you say the same representative, you have Moshe Rabbeinu.
That's right, and he's speaking in the name of the same God, and it's Makkah after Makkah after Makkah, been predicted in exactly the same order, and splitting in all of it, right? Why should I think that there are many different forces? Many different forces, a much more complicated picture than there being one force that appears repeatedly. Again, this is like an alternate possibility, but you wouldn't tolerate that in any other sphere.
It was clear to them that there's only one divine force, so if they hear some sort of divine
It was really clear to them. The evidence that they have is that there's one divine force operating. The evidence is that it predicts and it fulfills its predictions, and Moshe Rabbeinu represents it as such, and because he can predict what's happening, he knows far more about it than they do, and that's the picture that they're being given. Now, if somebody thinks that it's not really that picture, he owes evidence that the picture that they're being given isn't correct.
Because Moshe Rabbeinu told them that there's only one divine being, and this one divine being is the one that's going to do X, Y, Z. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, right. It's like somebody telling you, yesterday I went swimming. They say, maybe he didn't. Maybe he didn't pay to say that. Maybe he has an identical twin brother, and maybe only the twin went. Those maybes are just unreasonable unless you have evidence for them.
So when these things happen, people could have questioned Moshe Rabbeinu and said, well, maybe it was a different divine being that did it, but that would be unlikely, is what we're saying, because why would you think such a thing? If Moshe Rabbeinu
A person who asks that question can't be convinced of anything. These are your parents? How do you know? DNA? They lied to you about the results of the DNA. Did you do the DNA test? You didn't? They lied to you. Prove it didn't so. You end up with nothing. Maybe you're really Chinese and you're just dreaming that you're speaking English? Really speaking Chinese? Maybe? That was Descartes' question. Right? There are maybes or a sheer. There are an infinity of maybes, of alternatives to everything that you believe. At a certain point you say, it's reasonable not to take into account all possible alternatives to what I believe on the grounds that they're only possibilities. They're only possibilities.
And the evidence that was available to them was that Moshe Rabbeinu told them time and time again that there's one God in the world and he's going to do miracle X. And then after Moshe Rabbeinu said that, the Jewish people saw that it actually happened. And this just happened time and time again until ultimately this divine being actually spoke to the entire Jewish people at Har Sinai.
That's right.
That's what we're saying.
Well, yeah, I think that's good enough. Yeah. Well, who's up? Yeah.
If you're using rationalism, like the Rambam would be the main proponent, where he says that you can't even use like active terms to describe God because he's so distant from us. How did the Rambam build his life to create a relationship with that unchanging entity?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. It's a deep question. I don't know if I can fully answer it, but it's an important question. And by the way, the Rambam and rationalism and all that's garbage. Forget those terminologies and everything else. The Ramchal, who's a Kabbalist, isn't one whit less rational than the Rambam, and the Rambam isn't one whit less mystical in that sense than the Ramchal. The Rambam says creation can't be understood by the human mind. And Ramchal says exactly the same thing. Can't understand how a being who has the negative qualities of a Kodesh Baruch Hu brings about a world. Not can, but how he does it, how he brings about a world. It's just something that can't be understood. And when he says in part 1, chapter 54 of the guide, when he says over and over again that all we can talk about is what he does, but not what he is, Ramchal says exactly those words with exactly the same terminology in Klolim Rishonim, which is one of his Kabbalistic works. So this vision of he's a philosopher, so he's rationalistic, the others aren't rationalistic, leave that in the university in the garbage pail where it belongs. And one of the things that I've seen myself and Rabbi Meisman drilled home to me is that the differences between what are called the philosophers, what are called the Kabbalists, are differences of nuance and differences of emphasis. They're not differences of fundamental belief. Just simply not true. Ramchal quotes the Rambam directly and indirectly, sometimes directly. And the Leshem quotes the Rambam directly. The Leshem, one of the greatest Kabbalists of the last 150 years, quotes him a number of times with the greatest possible praise. Setting up these categories and saying they're at war with one another, and alternate versions of the whole Jewish vision and so on and so on. It's absolute nonsense. So now the question is this: if all I can do is describe what something does, can I then have a relationship with it? What kind of relationship can I have? Now, there's a tricky question here, a tricky idea here. In talking about foreknowledge and free will, the Rambam says you can't understand God's knowledge. Just as you can't understand his essence, you can't understand his knowledge. So the question arises, let's see now, is essence okay? I can't understand it, which means cancel all descriptions, cancel all concepts. It's just there's nothing there. When you say his essence, it's just an empty box. Now you say, in the same way, I can't understand his knowledge. But then, if it's in the same way, it means when I talk about his knowledge, it's an empty box. Then why do you call it knowledge? Why do you say, I can't understand his knowledge? Why not simply say, we can't say he knows, because K-N-O-W-S means our concept of knowledge. It doesn't apply to him, so just don't say anything. Why give it a name and then say, I can't understand it? What justifies using the name? So, in explaining the text of the Rambam, I heard from my oldest son a very important idea here. And that is, if you deny knowledge to a Kodesh Baruch Hu, you might then wonder, well, what does he do? By the way, if he doesn't have knowledge, that doesn't make him ignorant. He's not ignorant either. He doesn't have knowledge, he's not ignorant. All our descriptions don't apply. But then, how does he operate? So what he said is this: Kodesh Baruch Hu has the ability to do everything that would be done if you had knowledge. He just doesn't do it with knowledge. He has all the capabilities of acting in a so-called knowledgeable way, but he doesn't get those abilities from knowledge. He gets it some other way. So it's not that he's less than knowledge, it's that he's more than knowledge. He includes something which is more fundamental that gives you all the same outcome that knowledge would be. I'll give you an analogy. This is only an analogy, but I think it makes the point clear. Imagine that you go back, you're a time traveler. You go back 200 years, and you take with you an MP4 memory and some little speakers. And you're talking to these people, and say, I'm a traveler from the future, so forth and so on. And then you decide to put on some music, and you start playing the music. Let's say it's violin music. So they look at you and they say, how did you do that? How did you do what? How did you get a man and a violin into that little box? I mean, how did you do it? It's unbelievable. Are there people so small? Listen to the sound of that violin. How did you get the man in the violin into the box? And you say, listen, there's no man in the box. There's no violin in the box. Don't lie to me. I know what a violin sounds like. I know how violin music is made. It's made by a person playing a violin. That I know. I just want to know how you got him into the box. That's all. Just explain that to me. What could you say to him? Listen, it's violin music, and if you did it on a synthesizer, it's not even produced by a violin. It's just the same quality of sound, right? So listen, the music is there. It's being produced in a way that you can't even imagine. It's violin sounds. There might be recorded violin music. It's violin sounds, but it's not being produced in a way that you could even imagine. So you get the same output, but you're getting the same output in an entirely different way. An entirely different way. So here too, HaKadosh Baruch Hu deals with the world in a way that knowledge would confirm, knowledge would dictate, knowledge would program, but doesn't do it through having knowledge. He does it for something else. So now I think to myself, well, how do I relate to him? I relate to HaKadosh Baruch Hu as something that has all the control and all the powers that knowledge would give. He just has it in some other way. All right. That means I can trust him, can I? He's not going to miss anything. He's not going to make mistakes. He's not going to, put things in the wrong place because he forgot. He has all the powers of knowledge. Maybe knowing that he has all these powers is enough, even though what's behind the powers, I don't know. And I'll give you, this is again only a partial analogy. The ancient world, I think it's the Greeks, we have the references to this in our language also. Thinking and feeling and deciding takes place in the heart. What's the brain for? The brain is a radiator to get rid of excess heat. That's why it has so much surface area, right? It's convoluted in such a way that it has a lot of surface area, so it can radiate a lot of heat. It just cools off the body, that's all. Radiators, the brain is, not important. It's all in the heart. Would that disturb you if I find out, it wasn't the heart all along, it was the brain. So all my relationships were phony, all my relationships were made a mistake, they were all based on a mistake. I don't really love him and he doesn't really love me, and so on and so on. I don't think you'd say that. And he said, okay, so it's the brain and not the heart, but he was doing all those things, and all those things that he did had all the significance that they had, so it was the brain, it was the heart. It doesn't matter so much. So I think that those are partial. What you don't get is that there's an experiencing being the way we experience. That's true, and that can be something which can be difficult to interact with, to have a relationship with. I think that it's a partial picture. It doesn't do the whole job, but it's a partial picture. It's a very good question. You should ask. Like I always say, you should ask other people because other people know things that I don't know, and you can fill in more about it. But that's as much as I can say about it. Yeah.
First of all, I broke it down with Kabbalah being the opposite of it. Because Kabbalah would seemingly introduce a needy God, a God that you could interact with, that gains when you give, and rationalism wouldn't. That's why I put them at two.
Yeah, but the Ramchal, who's a Kabbalist, says exactly what the Rambam says, word for word, that all we can describe is what he does.
Would the Ramchal say that when I'm giving to God, he's receiving?
Giving to God, he's receiving. I mean, everybody has to deal with that. They have to deal with korbanos. I don't understand what, when you makdish something, and then you can give it and present it as a korban. Everybody has to deal with that, whether you're a Rambam or the Ramchal. Have to have something to say about that.
Rambam says it's for you. No? It's to build yourself.
I'm mistaking his question. You're talking about the motivation. He's talking about what he's doing. It can build me when I give something to somebody else, but I am giving something to somebody else. It builds me, but the question was, what am I doing in the giving? It wasn't the question of what the motivation is, what the consequences are. It was about the action itself. The action itself is giving something.
What if what you're doing in the giving is actually just growing? He's not getting a thing.
But then how is this action causing me to grow?
Because it's in your head.
how the action is in my head, the action is my body carries out. When I give tzedakah,
The action is when you carry out a philosophy. The philosophy is what makes you change, and you do the action to build it into you. So if the philosophy behind it is that you are doing something, then you could do an action which philosophically you think is doing something, even if it does nothing. And that can build you.
you mean you could live in a fantasy world? You could take LSD and think you're being built also. When you give tzedakah, you're really giving money to the other person, and by giving money to the other person, that builds you. If you hand it and he puts out his hand and it slips and falls on the floor, then you won't be built. You'll only be built if he actually gets it and his life is improved by it. The action is what embodies the philosophy, and without the action, we find out later that it didn't reach him. You sent it the mail, and the mail comes back to you 2 months later. You say, well, I was built anyway? No, I failed to build myself because I'm...
What if you never find out? What's the difference?
So the difference is because then you didn't really do it. The difference here is between, this is what's called moral luck in philosophy. When two people shoot a bullet, each one at a target, and they aim well, and the bullet flies, but the wind blows one aside, and not the other one aside. So we think we have a stira, we have a fundamental paradox. On the one hand, we say, well, this guy's guilty of murder, and this guy's guilty of attempted murder. Murder and attempted murder aren't really the same. And the guy died. In the case, the guy didn't die. On the other hand, from the point of view of the rishis in the person, both of them wanted to commit murder. Both of them pulled the trigger. In one case, the wind blew it aside. How can that make any difference as to my evaluation of the person? This is a problem. It's an unresolved problem in philosophical thinking. But in the Jewish context, the problem doesn't arise because the consequences are what HaKadosh Baruch Hu made happen, and he made them happen because he wanted the results of those consequences to happen to the person who pulled the trigger. And in this case, he wanted him to be tried for murder and executed. In this case, he didn't want him to be tried for murder and executed. And that may be because when you look into the personality of the person and where it's coming from, the rishis of one is not the same as the rishis of the other. The evil of the one isn't the same level of evil. And that's what's being reflected by it. So for us, the problem doesn't arise when we don't evaluate people's moral condition, moral character, on the basis of an action that they perform, number one. And number two, the difference of consequences isn't random. It didn't happen by luck. It happened by HaKadosh Baruch Hu because he wants these consequences to apply to them. So the bottom line is that what you do to build yourself is to fulfill the mitzvahs that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you to do. So then his question was, when you're doing the mitzvah of giving it to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is he really receiving it? Your question was an entirely separate question. What am I trying to accomplish by giving it? What the outcome? What's my purpose in giving it? That's an interesting question. It's an interesting subject also, but it wasn't his question. His question was, do we understand that you're really giving it to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? So here, I think the real background is this: giving it. Can I give away something that isn't mine? There are Gemaras about this. Of course not. It's not mine. Someone stole a field and he sells it to somebody else. Say that we've shown him there. There's no sale. There's no sale because there's no seller who's transmitting it. The person who took the money didn't have possession of it. So that's not a sale, right? So the question here is this: what we call ours is really the work tools that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us in order to accomplish what we need to accomplish. Not really ours. Not even a pencil belongs to me, really. Indeed, vis-a-vis human beings, there's no such thing as ownership. If there is ownership at all, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Konei HaKol. He owns everything, but he owns it because he creates it. So then, all I'm doing is surrendering control. It's in my meadow, behind my fence, and now I take and I bring it to the base of Mikdash and have it presented to the base of Mikdash. Well, that's a difference. It's different whether I keep it in my field, and whether I bring it to the base of Mikdash. But transferring ownership, I never had ownership in the first place. That thing was assigned to me so as to be able to be used in a HaKadosh Baruch Hu service, like everything else is assigned to me. So I don't think we have to think of it in terms of a legal transfer of ownership. That I wouldn't think of it as.
We'd say the only thing I have ownership is of what I think I have ownership of. My consciousness, that I have ownership of, seemingly.
You didn't say it quite right, because there are people who think they own their cars also. Yeah, it's not that what you think you have ownership of, is that the only thing that I have control over, right? But I have control over the animal also. I can lock it behind the gate and keep it there, or not lock it behind the gate, and it won't be kept there.
I'm saying it's mine if I choose to honor God or not.
What's up to you is whether you choose to honor. Yes, that's right. That's what's up to you. Hakol b'yishamayim, chutz b'yirah shamayim, which has limitations, but okay. So that's quite correct. So when you would talk about giving it to God, you present that in terms of transfer of ownership. That's not quite a right way to describe it, because you never had ownership of it in the first place.
You can't transfer the honor?
You know what? I'm talking about transfer of ownership. You don't own honor.
Right, you give it. I'm saying that's what you
No, right, but it's not something that you own, right? My example is the treasurer of a corporation, and he pays out money to the corporation for its various expenses. He signs the checks, but if he thinks it's his money, he's going to be in trouble. He's just an agent of the corporation whose job it is to sign the checks. The same thing is true. I used to say this as a quiz to real beginners. I never gave a penny of mine to charity, never once, because it's not mine. I'm following the rules of the owner as to how I should apportion this money which came under my control. That's all. So the idea of transferring ownership between yourself and God is not going to be a realistic idea altogether. Okay, good for today.